Well, the list of former national security officials standing against President Trump's decision to strip former CIA Director John Brennan of his security clearance is growing, expanding, not only with more former Republican appointments, but a long list of nonpartisan career professionals who have never before spoken out on a highly charged political issue. More than 175 former intelligence officials now adding their names to a previous letter stating that former government officials have their right to express their unclassified views on what they see as critical national security issues without fear of being punished. Why this unprecedented storm of reaction from the usually silent national security sector? Joining me now, Avril Haines, former Deputy Director of the CIA, former White House Deputy National Security Advisor. She was one of the first to sign the letter opposing President Trump's actions against John Brennan. And Jeffrey Smith, a former General Counsel at CIA, who signed the opposition letter on Sunday. Welcome both. Thank you very much. First to you, Avril. You know the agency. You've been at the NSC and and following that at the CIA. Why do you think this outpouring?
I really think it comes down to the very fundamental principle that you outlined at the beginning, Andrea. I think people really feel a frustration with respect to this abuse of power, as I see it. And really, it strikes us, I think, that he's using the security clearance as just one mechanism that is in his arsenal, essentially, to try to quash dissent in a way that really undermines some of the fundamental principles that we have, founded our government on, and one of them is free speech. I think it was Madison who said it's the cornerstone of American government, and frankly, it's one of the key areas that sets us apart in so many different respects. We actually embrace disagreement, we encourage it, we think that's part of what helps us to reveal political truths and to have a better system of democracy, and what we see here is the president abusing his authority to actually promote a restriction on free speech.
Jeff Smith, you're an esteemed lawyer, well-known Washington figure, former general counsel at CIA. And what are your concerns about, for instance, the threat against Bruce, who is a mid-level bureaucrat in the Justice Department, but could that be the beginning of a threat to current officials, which could even extend to the Mueller team, because if those prosecutors don't have clearances, they cannot continue their investigation?
Yes, Avril stated the overall principle correctly, but if he reaches into the ranks of serving civil servants and pulls a clearance for the kinds of reasons that he's talked about, that's really threatening to the heart of our democracy, because it would, Bruce would have to leave the government, others would be intimidated from speaking out. It would just be, I think, an impossibly difficult and dangerous situation for the nation, and that's why I think many of us signed this letter. It's one thing to go after former officials, which bothers me to begin with, but to reach into the ranks is just destructive. It would chill anybody from speaking the truth to power, which would make our country much weaker, not stronger.
Now, the president has tweeted today about these security clearances. Everybody wants to keep their security clearance. It's worth great prestige and big dollars, even board seats. And that is why certain people are coming forward to protect Brennan. It certainly isn't because of the good job he did. He is a political hack. Jeff, I know you know John Brennan. Avril, you worked with him. The fact is he's not on a board, and a lot of these people signing this letter, I'll go through some of it, some of the new additional names, have nothing to do with boards, have nothing to do with making money off of maintaining their clearances. It has everything to do with public service.
I think that's true. It's certainly true that countless number of former government officials do retain their clearances because they are working in private industry. They are helping design weapons systems, they're helping develop encryption, all kinds of things that support the government's national security efforts, and that's vital to continue. But the bigger issue of abusing the president's power to silence his critics, and I think that's why we're all signing on. We love this country. We signed up to serve. I've got 25 years of government service. This is not something that we agreed to serve. It's not why so many people died on battlefields around the world. We have a democracy. We don't have an authoritarian leader.
John Brennan, of course, was on with Chuck Todd yesterday, and before that was on with Rachel Maddow on Friday night. Here's what he had to say on Meet the Press on Sunday.
If my clearances and my reputation as I'm being pulled through the mud now, if that's the price we're going to pay to prevent Donald Trump from doing this against other people, to me it's a small price to pay. So I am going to do whatever I can personally to try to prevent these abuses in the future. And if it means going to court, I will do that. I love and respect and admire my former colleagues in CIA and other places, and I will fight to keep their profession pure, objective, and not being politicized. And members of Congress need to step up. This is the time that your country is going to rely on you, not to do what is best for your party, but do what is best for the country.
Avril, if you want to comment on what John Brennan had to say and also the president's tweet about him being a hack.
Yeah, absolutely. I was John Brennan's deputy at the CIA for close to 2 years and worked with him for many more years than that. And honestly, I can't think of anybody who's less of a political hack than John Brennan. He is somebody, I think the John Brennan I know is the one that's reflected in Bill McRaven's op-ed, where he talks about the integrity, the just tireless efforts to try to keep this country safe, the extraordinary public servant that he is. And he's a voice of ethical, standards within every meeting and every institution that he's been a part of. He's really an absolutely extraordinary man. And I'd say that, I do think that, as we can see, John Brennan is not being silenced by this abuse, but at the same time, he recognizes, as I think all of us do, that actually the revocation of his clearance and the threat to revoke other people's clearances, and particularly the Bruce Ohr point, because I fully agree with what Jeff said, is really the danger that we're facing. In other words, the chilling effect that it can have on folks who are not necessarily at the cabinet level, essentially, and whose livelihood may depend on their security clearance and the work that they're doing in the defense industry in perfectly, sort of responsible and public good jobs, in effect, although they may not be in government, who may feel chilled, but also the fact that he may be undermining our institutions' ability to do the work that they need to do, because he may be, threatening security clearances of mid-level folks who are engaging in activity that he disagrees with, and as a consequence, they can't work on those issues, and it undermines the ability, for example, of law enforcement to pursue investigations that are proper and other types of work in the U.S. government.
And I want to just share with all of our viewers some of the names, unusual names. William J. Burns is the former Deputy Secretary of State. He joined that letter. John Bellinger, former legal counsel in the Bush NSC and later at the State Department. Tony Lake, former National Security Advisor to Bill Clinton. Tony Mendez, former CIA Senior Tech Operations Officer. If you remember Argo, the movie, or in reality, that was the man who helped create that possibility for our diplomats to get out of being held hostage in the embassy in Tehran to the Canadian embassy. Ambassador Dennis Ross, who worked for all presidents, both parties. Sean O'Keefe, former Secretary of the Navy, longtime associate of Dick Cheney. Nick Rasmussen, former director of the National Counterterrorism Center. Bruce Rydell, former CIA analyst and national intelligence officer. Dennis Ross, also a Middle East negotiator. Jeffrey Smith, you signed it yesterday. Jeff, you know these people, you know Bruce Rydell, you know a lot of these players. They're not political.
They're not political. They may have served in partisan, or rather in politically appointed positions, but none of us regard national security as a partisan issue. We regard it as service to the nation. It's an honor to serve, and the president is doing a grievous dishonor in threatening to take away security clearances. Let me just add quickly, Senator Mark Warner has proposed legislation that would essentially, as I understand it, prohibit the revocation of a clearance on policy grounds or on expression of First Amendments. I think that's the sort of thing that Congress ought to do, and essentially I think that was what John Brennan was calling for yesterday.
And we should also point out, of course, that John Brennan is a national security analyst for NBC News and MSNBC as well. Thank you, Avril Haines. Thank you, Jeff Smith. Thank you both so much for coming in today. I appreciate it. And coming up, the sins of the fathers, Pope Francis breaking his silence about the decades of sexual abuse by hundreds of Catholic priests in Pennsylvania exposed by that Attorney General's report. This is Andrea Mitchell Reports on MSNBC.
Morning Joe speaks truth to power.
He is destroying the Republican Party for years.